organizations to sue the Christie administration in order to stop the grants to a prominent Lakewood yeshiva and the Princeton Theological Seminary. Ed Barocas of the ACLU says the grants violate the constitutional separation of church and state.
Because that would be our taxpayer money going to supporting proselytizing of particular religions.
The Supreme Court says it lacks enough information to issue a ruling in the suit, but it's ordering the state to conduct a fact-finding process, something the Christie administration refused to do. Then the court will issue its final decision. It's 88 degrees at 7:35.
Support for NPR comes from WNYC members and from Subaru, committed to doing its part to make the world a better place by supporting philanthropic initiatives in local communities. Learn more at Subaru.com/lovepromise. Love, it's what makes a Subaru a Subaru. And Indeed, used by over 3 million businesses for hiring, where employers can post job openings, then use screener questions and an online dashboard to identify qualified candidates. Learn more at Indeed.com/hire.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. If you drive on the West Side Highway in Manhattan, you cannot help but notice Trump Place looming over the skyline. It is one of several buildings in New York bearing Donald Trump's name. Well, tomorrow, residents will ask a judge to let them change their building's name. NPR's Jim Zarroli reports on how the Trump brand is losing its luster in the city he's from.
A dozen years ago, James Tufenkian noticed a really nice building going up in his neighborhood on Manhattan's East Side. He went inside and loved what he saw. Just about the only thing he didn't like was the name, Trump World Tower.
It was kind of detestable. Even at that time, I didn't like the idea of being in a building with his name on it, but it didn't have nearly the significance that it does now.
Tufenkian, who heads a carpet company, still lives in the building, and he loves it. Great staff, nice views, very well managed. He just doesn't like that name.
Look, I have lots of people. I have to explain to everybody who comes to visit me that I'm sorry about the name on the building. That I live there doesn't constitute any kind of endorsement.
President Trump doesn't own Trump World Tower, but his company manages it, and of course it bears his name. And there are signs that name has become something of a liability. That is also true at Trump's signature property, Trump Tower, where the president and his family have long lived. Jonathan Miller, who runs an appraisal firm in New York, says there are a lot of newer luxury buildings in the city, and they've eclipsed Trump Tower.
It's no longer the top tier of the market because this new product has changed all that.
And he says the intense security at the building since the election probably discourages some buyers.
That has the potential to impact values in the building.
But even in other Trump buildings where security isn't an issue, Trump's unpopularity may be hurting property values. The online brokerage firm Zumper compared rents in Trump buildings to others in the city. They found that in most cases, Trump apartments sat on the market longer and fetched lower prices. Managing broker Nathan Tondo says if an apartment is a good deal, even with the Trump name, people will still want to live in it. But the name does matter.
We've had rental clients who didn't want to see buildings because they did have a Trump name on them. And we try to explain that it is owned by someone else, it's just the Trump name, and they said, I know, but walking into that every day just feels wrong.
Real estate prices have softened in New York, especially at the high end, so that may be a factor in what's happening. But some buildings clearly see Trump's name as a liability. Trump properties in Canada and Panama have rebranded themselves. In New York, the Trump Soho is now the Dominic. 3 Upper West Side buildings have dropped the Trump name, and tomorrow a condo building at 200 Riverside Boulevard will ask a judge for the right to do so as well. The building's lawyer declined to comment. Elizabeth Holub, who lives in Trump Place, says the irony is it's a really nice place to live.
The truth of the matter is that it is, look, I can't stand Donald Trump. I'm sorry, he's the president. I don't support his policies. The reality is it's the best run building.
The building is managed by the Trump Organization, which opposes the name change. Eric Trump has said the effort is being spearheaded by a few rogue residents. But a straw poll in the building suggests most residents support the change. President Trump spent years building up his brand, but for some people in the city where he grew rich, that brand has become toxic. Jim Zarroli, NPR News, New York.
Millions of people have left Venezuela over the last few years to escape the economic catastrophe that's been unfolding under President Nicolas Maduro. Tens of thousands have moved south to neighboring Brazil. NPR's Philip Reeves says this migration is now spreading into the heart of the Amazon rainforest.
Jose Luis left Venezuela a few months back. His work on a farm had dried up. He couldn't get a job. His money was close to worthless because Venezuela's currencies collapsed. Like many thousands of Venezuelans before him, Luis headed south and crossed into northern Brazil. Yet he kept going, traveling hundreds of miles to a place he admits he knew almost nothing about. Luis came here to the city of Manaus, deep in the Amazon rainforest. Manaus is by the Rio Negro, a huge river that flows into the Amazon itself. It has a busy port. Luis, who's 23, is now 1,000 miles from home. He left Venezuela because he was hungry. In Brazil, he's still hungry. We sometimes skip meals because we can't afford them, he explains. It's after dark. Luis is hanging out beneath some trees in a square. He spent the day looking for odd jobs around the port. It did not go well. On better days, he stays in a hostel. On this night, he must sleep here, he says, in the open. Right now, though, Luis is waiting with a handful of other Venezuelans to be fed. Volunteers from the Universal Church, an evangelical organization, come here at night with food. The volunteers arrive with plastic chairs. The Venezuelans sit down for prayers and a sermon. The preacher hands out copies of the Universal Church's newspaper and tells the Venezuelans to place these on top of their heads while he calls on God to rip their sins from their bodies. After this large serving of religion, the Venezuelans are given a small serving of bread and soup. Life here is tough for these men, yet they say it's much worse back home. Some 52,000 Venezuelans have come to Brazil since the beginning of last year, according to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. At least 40,000 stayed in the northern city of Boa Vista, where Venezuelans now comprise more than 10% of the population. They arrive, often penniless, in a country where they don't speak the language. It's become very difficult to find work, says Enzo Perez, a Venezuelan truck driver who stayed in Boa Vista for a while. When you go looking for a job, 7 fellow Venezuelans will have got there before you, he complains. Perez says that's why he took the highway through the rainforest to Manaus. He now sells bottles of water on the streets. Traveling that highway takes roughly 18 hours.
É muito perigoso.
It can be dangerous, says Andrea Taniguchi.
E para a mulher com a criança.
Especially for single women with children.
Existem relatos que eles.
There are reports of robberies at bus stations and sexual assaults, including rape. Taniguchi is a social worker with Caritas, a Catholic relief organization providing legal and social support to Venezuelans. On average, more than 400 Venezuelans a week travel through the forest to Manaus. For many, though, it's not the road that's hard. It's the sacrifices they must make to support families back home. Virginia Vargas is a qualified primary school teacher. These days, she sells homemade snacks on the streets to make money to feed the kids she left back home.
Tengo 2 niños, un bebé de 2 años y...
A 2-year-old boy and a daughter of 11. Vargas hates being away from her children.
Me duele mucho cuando hablo porque es demasiado difícil.
Yet Venezuela's meltdown has left her and many others like her with little choice. Philip Reeves, NPR News, Manaus.
You're listening to All Things Considered on WNYC. I'm Jamie Floyd. New York City officials are making another attempt to rein in the explosive growth of ride-hailing services like Uber and Lyft.
The city council has introduced several bills to attempt to address the issue. The de Blasio administration tried to cap the growth of Uber back in 2015, only to walk away from the plan after an extensive lobbying effort by the company. Joining us to discuss what's different this time around is WNYC's transportation reporter, Stephen Nesson. Hey, Stephen.
Hello, Jamie.
So this isn't the first time the de Blasio administration has tried to cap the growth of these services. The 2015 effort crashed and burned. So, Stephen, what's changed since then?
Back then, the mayor canceled a vote on capping the number of app-based vehicles after agreeing to conduct a study on congestion. This came after, like you said, an intense lobbying and media campaign by Uber and other companies like Lyft. They agreed to share some of their data with the city for this study, and the city eventually released a report which found ride-hailing apps were not contributing to increased congestion. That came out in January of 2016. About a year later, another report came out, this one from traffic expert Bruce Schaller, which completely contradicted the mayor's report, and he fully pinned the blame for increasing congestion and slowing traffic speeds on the ride-hailing app industry.
Fast forward to this week, the drumbeat to rein in the growth of app-based rides is getting louder. The New York State Legislature passed a small congestion pricing fee for all city car services, and that includes yellow cabs and ride-hailing companies last month. So what are city officials proposing on top of that?
There are several bills that have been introduced to the council this week. The most controversial of them, proposed by the maroon cowboy hat-wearing Bronx councilman Ruben Diaz Sr., is a $2,000 yearly registration fee for all app-based drivers. Those against the fee, including the city's Taxi and Limousine Commission, say it's too costly to drivers. Another bill would require app-based drivers to only drive for one app service. And there are also 3 separate bills to restrict the number of new app-based taxis.
So is Mayor de Blasio in favor of any of these bills?
A spokesman for Mayor de Blasio wrote in a terse statement that the city is welcome to a conversation about them, but worries about the financial burden and limitations on drivers.
The city's Taxi and Limousine Commission regulates all taxis, including app-based ride hails. They have to share the mayor's concerns, right?
Meera Joshi, who is the head of the Taxi and Limousine Commission and is appointed by the mayor, is less circumspect than her boss. And yes, she is concerned about app-based vehicle growth. And ultimately, she's concerned that it's hurting all types of for-hire drivers. Here she is from this week's council hearing.
Without limits from this council, we have every reason to believe this steady growth will continue, and the challenges associated with this growth will likewise get larger and more consequential.
What do the drivers have to say about this? Drivers for services like Uber and Lyft.
I spoke with one recently, Namdul Gurung. He's 25 years old and has been driving for Uber for the past 8 months. He's from Nepal but lives in Sunnyside, Queens now. He told me he makes about $300 a day, but it's becoming much harder because there's just too much competition.
Because the money that drivers used to make in 7 hours before, now we have to work for the same money. We have to work like 12 hours, so that's how hard it is right now.
So now 12 hours to make the same money he used to make in 7. What do the app companies say, and what's next for these bills?
Uber has actually been in support of some sort of congestion pricing. Of course, they're the biggest player, and one theory that's been floated is that they're hoping it'll price out their competition, but they are against this $2,000 fee for drivers. They argue most of their trips start outside of Manhattan, so they're serving transit-starved areas. And they correctly argue that the TLC already regulates them, but it's not the TLC's job to cap drivers. By law, they have to give a license to anyone that applies and meets the safety criteria. Now, all of those bills will be debated and maybe come up for a vote if there's enough support.
All right, WNYC's Stephen Nesson, our transportation reporter. Stephen, thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
On the next Brian Lehrer Show, comedian Wyatt Cenac, who rose to prominence on The Daily Show and now has his own HBO show, Problem Areas, combining the funny and the unfunny, like the study of combat psychology known as killology.
Killology is a made-up term for a a made-up scientific discipline made up by a guy who's never actually killed anybody.
Also, we'll take calls from Newark listeners on the state of the city 5 days before the mayoral election. The Brian Lehrer Show at 10 a.m. on WNYC.
WNYC supporters include Japan Society, presenting the first U.S. exhibition dedicated to the large-scale gold-leaf screens and painted scrolls of Japan's 16th century master Hasegawa Tohaku through May 6th. More at japansociety.org. Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey, offering more than 60 technology-driven business and engineering graduate programs online or on campus. Graduate Open House May 3rd. More at stevens.edu/open house.
This is All Things Considered on WNYC. I'm Jamie Floyd. While New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy continues his drive to legalize recreational marijuana in the state, New Jersey's long-standing medicinal marijuana program has been growing by leaps and bounds. So much so that dispensaries in the Garden State are having a tough time keeping up with skyrocketing demand. WNYC's Fred Mogul reports.
Death Star isn't a very upbeat name for a particular marijuana strain, but Jessie Gill says it's the only one that relieves the chronic pain in her spine.
It manages my pain, but, I'm still able to function with it.
Gill's a registered nurse who was injured on the job several years ago. Recently, it's become hard for her to find Death Star at the local dispensary, one of only 5 in the entire state.
It's almost always out of stock. They're just slammed with new patients.
About 20,000 New Jersey residents are certified by special state-authorized physicians to access medical marijuana. More than 4,000 of them have registered since January, twice the number in the same period last year. In March, Governor Murphy dramatically expanded the list of eligible health conditions to include anxiety, migraines, and certain types of chronic pain. Jeff Brown from the State Health Department says the state will soon get a 6th dispensary, and some of the existing ones are developing satellite locations.
Hopefully by those 2 mechanisms, we'll see an increase in access for patients.
Due to legal conflicts with the federal government, dispensaries can't import marijuana from other states. And that's why Gill and other patients expect the shortages and bottlenecks to get worse before they get better. Fred Mogul, WNYC News.
Dispensaries contacted by WNYC did not return calls seeking comment.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. Teachers in this country are fired up. That is from a teacher walkout in Oklahoma last month. Today, schools in Arizona are closed because teachers are on strike there. We've also seen walkouts recently in West Virginia, in Colorado, and Kentucky. A new NPR and Ipsos poll of teachers from around the U.S. shows most of them support teachers' right to strike. The poll also finds that 59% of teachers have had to work a second job at some point to make ends meet. NPR's Anya Kamenetz is here with more about these poll results. Hey there.
Hi.
So 59% of teachers? That's kind of amazing for having to work a second job on top of teaching.
Yes, and again, this is a representative sample of teachers from all 50 states. And on top of that, almost half said they had to run up debt to pay the bills, and most said they had at some point worked a second job. One of them who told us this was Dana Smith, a 15-year veteran high school English teacher in Gilbert, Arizona. And she talked to our producer, Claire Lombardo.
I've done tutoring, I've done babysitting, I've cleaned houses. At one point, I did some office cleaning in the evening.
And of course, that's on top of the demands of the job itself. More than 3/4 of teachers told us they'd help students outside of school hours, and more than 8 in 10 had bought school supplies out of their own pockets.
Wow. So do those numbers help explain some of the support that you're finding, that this poll is finding, among teachers for these teacher strikes?
Yeah, I think so. 4 out of 5 of these teachers told us they're at least somewhat supportive of the right to strike for teachers, and that's a little bit higher than the general public. However, these feelings are nuanced. I mean, teachers feel a real sense of responsibility, I think, towards their students. So Eva Schultz, who's a 5th grade teacher in New Haven, Connecticut, told us.
I see the long-term goal, but short-term, I think that it's going to be difficult for those students.
And Smith, our teacher in Arizona, felt the same way. In fact, we reached her during the walkout, and she wasn't on the picket lines. She said she was very sympathetic to the cause, but...
My problem is that we're public employees, and we're not hurting a nameless, faceless corporation. We're hurting the people we're supposed to be here to serve.
Hey, that's interesting to hear, and I wonder if, Anya, if you can put this in context for us in terms of what may be coming next, where we are in the arc of these strikes and walkouts.
Yeah, so, a little less than half of teachers nationwide are actually in a union, and most of these walkouts have occurred in right-to-work states where unions are smaller and weaker. And so with so much of this organizing happening grassroots over social media, it really raises the question of whether there's enough political structure in place to keep this movement rolling.
All right, thanks, Anya.
Thank you.
Anya Kamenetz with NPR's Ed Team.
Democrats are increasingly confident that they'll win back control of the House of Representatives. If that happens, those looking for new leadership are going to have to keep looking. Nancy Pelosi announced that she would run again to be Speaker. NPR's lead political editor, Domenico Montanaro, says that decision is certain to have an impact on this year's elections. He joins me in the studio now. Hey there, Domenico.
Thanks, Audie.
So first, give me the exact terms that Nancy Pelosi used today.
Well, Pelosi told the Boston Globe that she's confident Democrats will win back control of the House this fall. And she said, in no uncertain terms, I will run for Speaker. And then she added that it's important that it not be 5 white guys at the table, no offense. I have no intention of walking away from that table, close quote. The 5 white guys she's talking about there, of course, would be the 2 Republican leaders in Congress, the 2 Democratic ones, and President Trump.
Is this all that much of a surprise? I mean, she's never been interested in walking away.
Well, she hasn't been interested in walking away, but there have been big calls for Pelosi to step aside, especially from younger activists who feel like the party looks more like yesterday rather than tomorrow. And they've been trying to push her to
Is that a dig at diversity?
No, it's the point is that they feel like that there are people who are the 3 top leaders in the House are all over 70 years old, and that they would like to see millennials and younger people who've been waiting for a while and feel like that these older generation of Democrats have been standing in the way.
She is a politician with 30 years of experience under her belt, right? I mean, that can't be all bad for the party.
No, definitely not. Pelosi's got a lot of strengths. I mean, she's one of the strongest fundraisers in the party, if not the strongest. She's raised $16 million just in the first quarter alone here, and that can't be discounted in a year when Democrats are looking to win back the House. She's been at the helm of the Democratic Party since when Democrats took over the House in 2007. She shepherded key legislation for President Barack Obama through really a fractious caucus with no drama whatsoever, which is not something Republican leaders can say for sure. A Democratic operative I spoke with today said that no one is better at getting and counting votes than she is, and contended that no one would be better at getting things done with Trump as president. You could argue that they think that she's pretty tough, can get things done. Another Democrat, though, described her as easily the most effective speaker in a generation, but added, I do think it's time to usher in a new era. And even the earlier Democrat that I talked to said that he thinks that she should step aside in 2020 when President Trump is running for re-election.
She is also easily a political villain, right, to Republicans.
Yeah, and this is the big reason why they would like to see the air sort of taken out of that, because, San Francisco liberal is something you hear in Republican ads, ad after ad in swing districts, and it's not used as a compliment. One analysis found that 1 out of every 3 ads this cycle, Republican ads this cycle, are using Pelosi's image to attack the Democrat that's running. There's reasons that they do this. Republicans found that Pelosi's the most unpopular figure in those swing districts. An NBC national poll earlier in March found that she's the least popular person or institution that of everyone that they rated. Her approval ratings in the 20s, lower than both political parties and even President Trump. That's why Democrats in swing districts, the places that Democrats need to win to take back the House, are distancing themselves from Pelosi. One Republican operative I talked to today said he's ecstatic that Pelosi is going to try to run for Speaker again if they win.
Is that enough to win midterms?
I mean, that's the big question, right? Just running against Pelosi is going to open up Republicans a criticism that they don't have a message.
Domenico, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
This program is brought to you in part by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Support for NPR comes from member stations and from Trader Joe's, offering its May Fearless Flyer for those searching for products like the Campfire S'mores Bar, gluten-free crisp bread, and Meyer Lemon Cake Mix with lemon icing. More at TraderJoe's.com and at Trader Joe's on Instagram. Rice University, tracking urban evolution. By surveying its hometown of Houston, Rice works to identify challenges and opportunities the nation may face as the century unfolds at rice.edu/future. And Focus Features with Tully. From director Jason Reitman and writer Diablo Cody, Juno was the beginning, young adult continue the journey. Tully is a comedy about what to do next, starring Charlize Theron, in theaters Friday.
WNYC, it's coming up on 8 o'clock, and I hope you'll stay tuned. Your Wednesday evening lineup on 93.9 FM begins with a special hour of The Moth, featuring stories from women around the world. Then on the TED Radio Hour, speakers explore ways to push out of comfort zones. That's all ahead on 93.9 FM. On AM 820, On Point is next. It's 83 degrees. We hit 90 in Central Park today. I believe that ties a record. And it'll be around 70 overnight. Mostly sunny, 88 tomorrow. Just a slight chance of an afternoon shower or thunderstorm. That slight chance through tomorrow evening. And a mostly cloudy Friday. Not quite as hot. The high 84. It's 8 o'clock.
This is WNYC, FM, HD, and AM New York.
The other thing young women know is if you're going to go out with a stranger, you meet them at a neutral place and you call at least one friend and say who you're going out with and where you're going. So I proceeded to call no one and give Mark my address. I thought, if this guy's a murderer, this could solve all my problems.
Next up, the Moth Radio Hour. True stories told before a live audience. I'm Sarah Austin Jeunesse, and in this episode, 6 stories of women and girls from around the world, including one from an 80-year-old Manhattanite recovering from a stroke.
I went from a cane to a walker. The walker had 4 wheels and handbrakes, and a basket in which I could put things, and a seat that I could sit on if I needed to. It became part of my life and a constant companion, and I felt it deserved some kind of recognition. So I decided to call it Alice Walker.
That story and more coming up next on the Moth Radio Hour from PRX, right after this.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the U.S. is committed to the dismantling of North Korea's weapons of mass destruction. Former CIA director who's taking over at state also saying as Trump prepares for a meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, the two countries are at a potentially historic crossroads.
Right now we have an unprecedented opportunity to change the course of history on the Korean Peninsula. I underscore the word opportunity. We're in the beginning stages of the work, and the outcome is certainly yet unknown.
The president has promised to reveal possibly as early as this week the timing and location of a meeting with Kim. The president was his first visit to the State Department. Trump fired his first Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. The White House is expecting an extremely close vote when the Senate considers the nomination of Gina Haspel, who would be the first woman to lead the CIA. NPR's Greg Myrie has the story.
The White House says Gina Haspel has strong support in the intelligence community, but Democratic senators have major reservations. They cite her involvement in the CIA's waterboarding campaign after the 2001 al-Qaeda attacks. Democrats also say the CIA has provided only limited information about Haspel's 32 years undercover at the spy agency. White House aide Mark Short says President Trump is reaching out to senators.
I think that unfortunately in this environment, we expect that every vote is close.
If confirmed, Haspel would replace Mike Pompeo, the new Secretary of State. She goes before the Senate Intelligence Committee next week. Greg Myrie, NPR News, Washington.
A 17-year-old teen from a North Dallas suburb is in jail with bond set at $3 million for making ISIS-inspired terroristic threats. Bill Ziebel with member station KERA in Dallas reports the high school student also tried to recruit others to kill people at a local mall.
Police say Mateen Azizi Yarand planned a mass shooting at Stonebriar Mall in Frisco, north of Dallas. The district attorney in Collin County says the high schooler sent more than $1,400 to others to buy weapons and other gear. He also planned to release a message to America to explain the attack. Officials say they learned of the plot after Azizi Yarand communicated with an FBI informant. They also credit several police departments and the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force for the arrest. The teen faces up to life in prison for criminal solicitation and 10 years for making a terroristic threat. For NPR News, I'm Bill Ziebel in Dallas.
Wrapping up a two-day meeting in Washington, the Federal Reserve Board's Open Market Committee took the expected path today, holding short-term interest rates steady, also expressing confidence inflation is approaching its 2% target. The Fed has given no indication it won't proceed with another expected rate hike. The body meets in June. Decision to leave rates unchanged was unanimous. On Wall Street, the Dow dropped 174 points. The Nasdaq was down 29 points. This is NPR.
This is WNYC in New York. I'm Lance Lucky. The American Museum of Natural History's climate change exhibit is getting an overhaul. WNYC's Danny Lewis reports the museum is reassuring the public it won't be influenced by conservative donors.
Earlier this year, a group of curators criticized the museum for including Rebecca Mercer on its board of trustees. Mercer and her father, Robert, have donated millions of dollars to Donald Trump's presidential campaign and other conservative groups that reject the scientific consensus that climate change is caused by humans. Now, as the Natural History Museum prepares to make major changes to the Gottesman Hall of Planet Earth, it says trustees have no part in the content of its exhibits. In a statement, museum officials write that those decisions are made exclusively by scientists and educators.
New York's Attorney General is preparing to appoint an investigator to look into how Manhattan's district attorney handled a sexual assault allegation against Harvey Weinstein in 2015. The Daily News says Governor Cuomo officially asked Attorney General Eric Schneiderman to look into the DA's handling of the case last week. The New York Public Library and the city's Department of Correction announced an unusual joint